Every who down in Who Newville liked the holidays a ton, but where to get great prices on gifts, they had no idea. None. They searched and they searched for great gifts under $25. Gifts for spouses and friends and even their toddlers. When suddenly one who shouted, Walmart has what you want, knowing they have Lego, Tree Hut, and low prices to flaunt. So they enjoy the holiday season as who's often do. Cheering and shouting, Walmart has incredible gifts. Who knew? Find gifts they'll love under $25 at Walmart.
You are tuned in to the FowlWeather Podcast, the forecast to your next successful hunt. Coming to you from the home office, Jack's Reef, New York.
The cold is coming, and the FowlWeather Podcast team dives deep into the numbers to review how snow and ice cover have changed throughout the flyways. We also have a Mallards on the Move report. Where will they peak this week? Also, our migration forecast and some listener Q&A, all today on the FowlWeather Podcast. A quick reminder to rate, follow, like, and share the FowlWeather Podcast to get all the latest updates and our exclusive duck migration forecast each Monday morning throughout season, plus all of our informative content throughout the year. We are also on Instagram and Facebook as well, where we share trends and tidbits about duck migration and links to our migration forecasts each week. Be the guy with the real information about the ducks and where the ducks are at. I appreciate y'all very, very much. And hey, I was going to say we're about 5 followers away from 2,500 people on Facebook. And for y'all to keep up with us there, just go ahead and push us over the edge with, to get us to 2,500 listeners, or followers. But hey, it blew up recently. We put a really cool graphic up of like a high ice cover and low ice cover year, and seemed to be attractive to folks. It's kind of the thing we do. We put up a lot of graphs, trends, tidbits about duck migration and things affecting duck migration. But really appreciate y'all being on there and keeping track of us. We thank our every week listeners. You know who you are. Those that never miss a single migration forecast episode each Monday morning. Y'all are as ate up as me about ducks, duck biology, and duck migration. You know where the ducks are at before the ducks know where they're at. Think about that. You know where the ducks are at before the ducks even know where they're at. Our dedicated weekly listeners can pick the best days to hunt because the FowlWeather Podcast forecasts fresh ducks hot from the north. Shoot the ducks from the north before they know where they're at. I'm your host, Dr. Mike, coming to you from the home office in Jack's Reef. We are prepping the farm for the coming cold. The fat does that we shot last week from the opener of gun season are processed and in the freezer. And I'll say the dogs are angry at us. Before our marshes freeze up hard, likely before our second split opens on December in our zone, it looks like they're going to freeze up hard, maybe even before that. We do plan on making some Thanksgiving week trips north and southeast of us for about an hour to find some ducks. Then it's on to the big water and rivers for the rest of season when our marshes freeze up. Maybe a goose field if there's any chance for that, but that is only open for a few days and at 1 goose per person. That one really isn't appealing to anyone out there right now. The 1 goose for 30 days was essentially a closed season. Very few folks even bother going at 1 goose over a 30-day period. In some places, that Canada goose season is open during the second split, but during the first split, it didn't even coincide with duck season, which might make sense when it's at 3 geese per day, but at 1, dang it. Just put it in duck season so we can at least bang away at a goose while duck hunting. Anyhow, the hunters were surveyed, and they said they wanted the goose season to be open outside the duck season to maximize hunting opportunities in New York. But when it's at 1 goose, that opinion probably changes, right? Anyhow, next year we are at 3 geese for 45 days, and people are scratching their heads how we went from 1 goose for 30 days to that liberal season. The reason? The Atlantic Flyway was overly cautious last year, even when the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service model that they asked for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to develop for them said that the goose population could sustain a much greater harvest. And now, with breeding goose numbers much up this year and the Fish and Wildlife Service model still saying the same thing, the Atlantic Flyway had to switch their decision on the season. We should have been at a season much more liberal this year. Poor form, in my opinion, on the Atlantic Flyway Tech Section and Council, because hunters are much more endangered as a species than the Canada goose. We know we can recover the long-lived Canada goose population by reducing seasons if we have to, but we do not know how to recover our best of the best conservationists that exists, all the great people across duck country that also goose hunt. Anyhow, enough ranting, because in general, I do believe that our agencies generally work very hard to make quality decisions for waterfowl hunters and the birds themselves. But we can't just protect the resource without also thinking about the hunters themselves, because the reason waterfowl have been so successful on this continent is because of the hunters. They are linked. We are linked to the birds, and the birds are linked to us. Because I opened this Pandora's box this year once again, we got to talk Bills football. And hey, maybe you're just a college football fan, and that's fine. We all have our thing, but the farm in Jack's Reef is Bills country. And man, in that country, it is in disarray. Everyone took their turn messing up on Thursday Night Football. Houston, we had a problem. Poor Josh Allen needs an offensive line that can defend him. He needs to take the sack and not turn his back on his receivers. Receivers that can't get open for him, by the way. And the Bills coaching staff, that needs to take a deep breath and regroup too. I'm really starting to feel like a Buffalo Bills fan once again this year. It's all hope and hard work, but little to show for it in the end. But the Bills are banged up and certainly need the extra rest before heading to the Steel City this coming weekend. I'm still a Bills fan, but I am frustrated and disappointed. Way too common of a feeling for a Bills fan. Up next, as we take a deep dive into trends in snow cover across North America and ice cover on the Great Lakes. So please stick with me. How many days have you had empty skies over the duck blind? Your property can be more with Wildlife Strategies. It is no secret that hiring a consultant, an expert in managing water, woods, and fields, an expert in duck food, an expert in hunting pressure management, hiring a consultant yields better habitat for the critters you chase. Less empty skies, more quality days of field, more smiles for miles with family and friends. If that's your game and goal, contact Ryan Delaney at ryan@farmlg.com for a site visit. All right, and we are back to talk snow cover. In our Weather Severity Index, or WSI, that predicts southward migrations of ducks, the amount and duration of snow cover definitely plays a role. Remember that the WSI is a combination of how cold is it, how many days has it been below freezing in a row, how deep is the snow, and how many days in a row has there been measurable snow on the ground. People do ask which variable are ducks most sensitive to, and the reality is all of them. They can trade off of each other, but most of the time the duck migration is much more sensitive to decreases in temperature than increases in snow depth and snow cover duration. So when folks state that they just look at the snow line as an indicator of migration, that can work, but if it's cold and below freezing for extended periods of time, even without snow, ducks still come south because wetlands ice up and the cost of thermoregulation, or the cost of them just using energy to maintain a constant body temperature, well, that cost greatly increases as temperatures decrease. So ducks move south to find a temperature closer to their thermal neutral zone, which is a point when they really don't have to do much to sustain themselves. This is why even when ducks show up in the south, but it is warm, they don't move as much. Of course, when it's opening day or a busy weekend, they get bumped around due to disturbance, and they often are available for harvest. But that doesn't mean they had to move because of weather. But that all said, let's look at changes in snow cover through time on this continent. The general trend for the northern hemisphere, and specifically North America as well, is for a delayed onset of snow cover going into winter compared to the past. So we are getting snow cover happening later in the fall, that fall-winter period. It is happening later than it used to, and this largely coincides with warmer temperatures. So precipitation is falling as rain at northern and mid-latitudes to a greater degree than in the past, when it would have fallen to the ground in the form of snow. This change is happening to a greater degree in a band with typical winter temperatures between 23 to 41 degrees Fahrenheit, which is kind of that mid-latitude area that ducks are kind of hanging up or balling up more frequently in the past few years. We did a really nice analysis of this and had it published in the scientific journal called the Wildlife Society Bulletin a few years ago that showed, based on changes in WSI, that about 1.65 million mallard-sized ducks could be wintering in this mid-latitude zone that would have been farther south in the early 1980s. Another note here consistently found in the literature is that the expression of this reduced snow duration effect is greatest along the coast in the mid-Atlantic and Pacific flyway regions, owing largely to a warming ocean that helps magnify these increasing temperatures and later onset of snow to a greater degree. Interestingly, though, what has been happening is that changes in timing of snow is not consistent across the continent, and we are actually slightly earlier for snow cover occurring in the Canadian and northern prairie U.S. regions. Yeah, you heard me right. So there's actually slightly earlier snow happening in the Canadian and northern U.S. prairie regions than in the past. But the snow is coming later in areas surrounding that Canadian and northern prairie regions, especially in the upper Midwest, Northwest Pacific Flyway, and Northeast Atlantic Flyway. This is interesting because the University of Missouri and Ducks Unlimited published a paper a couple years ago using band recoveries to estimate changes in timing of movements and changes in latitude of harvest, and found that for some species early in fall, that recoveries were happening farther south early in the fall winter than in the past, the opposite of what you would think. A change that could be explained by increasingly early snowfall and colder temperatures in the prairie region, potentially pushing out some species of wimpy ducks earlier than in the past. And also, here's the deal. Just because snow comes later doesn't mean we don't still hit the same snow cover extent on the continent. Specifically for the interior portion of North America, we have seen no detectable or significant decline in the overall extent of snow cover that eventually happens in winter. Of course, this is also regional and could be occurring because the Great Lakes stay ice-free in winter, which allows for greater lake effect snow that has actually become increasingly common, especially in the latter portions of winter. That is the predicted trend as we move forward, at least until it becomes too warm for much of winter in the Great Lakes region, and then the lake effect snow starts to fall as rain, an expected trend which is in a lot of these models through 2050 and 2100, which, by the way, well, all right. By 2100, we're all going to be dead, but the prediction is that most mallards and black ducks won't even need to leave the Great Lakes region if we get the continued warming that is predicted. Colleagues and I published a paper entitled Projected Influences of Changes in Weather Severity on Autumn-Winter Distributions of Dabbling Ducks in the Mississippi and Atlantic Flyway during the 21st century, if you're interested in looking it up. And that is what we found, is that mallards and black ducks by the year 2100, on a lot of years, won't even have to leave the Great Lakes. Whew. But we did mention changes in Great Lakes ice cover there, so up next we will head to the Great Laurentian Lakes of the upper Midwest and East. So please stick with me. Beckman Game Calls has it dialed in. If you want a duck call that is adjustable to your air pressure and sounds like a duck, this is it. I've blown a ton of different calls in my life, but this one is the real deal. Look, we don't endorse just anything. We are only going to put forward a call that works. The Edison by Chris Beckman of Beckman Game Calls? Yeah, this beauty sounds like a duck. I only know of one published research paper focused on what makes a duck call sound like a duck. Go look me up, and you will see that colleagues and I have the only paper published in scientific literature about what makes a duck call sound like a duck. For sure, Chris Beckman did his homework, and this call sounds like a duck. This guy knows how to make a duck call, period. But don't just take my word for it. Here's the proof. First, a hen recording, and then the Edison in the big woods of Arkansas. Visit them today at BeckmanGameCalls.com. Hey folks, a reminder that Beckman Game Calls is closed for the season, so look for new calls from him next year. The name Laurentian Great Lakes refers to the Great Lakes of North America, and the Laurentian part of the name comes from the Laurentian tide ice sheet that carved out their basins during the last ice age. The 5 Laurentian Great Lakes, Superior, Michigan, Huron, Erie, and Ontario, comprise the largest freshwater ecosystem on the planet and provide valuable ecosystem services to millions of people in Canada and the United States, which includes fish and wildlife-based recreation. Waterfowl hunting on the Great Lakes is a time-honored tradition for sure. But the face of the Great Lakes during the winter is changing greatly. The general summary is that over the past 4 decades, the Great Lakes suffered a significant decrease in the extent and duration of ice cover, and projections suggest that ice cover may become a rare occurrence by the end of the 21st century, the same thing we just heard about with the black ducks. This is all consistent with the earlier note here about our projection that mallards and black ducks will very often be able to stay all winter on the Great Lakes in the future. Interestingly, though, within this declining trend in ice, we can't ignore that we still have high ice years. It is not a consistent decline through time, but rather the maximum ice cover is less than it once was. So if Lake Erie consistently froze over nearly entirely each year, now it fairly regularly on a high ice year might get to about 85% ice covered. Same with the low ice years. When that would have about 30 to 40% ice cover, now it is only 20 to 30% ice covered. So the highs and lows are increasingly less percent ice cover. So what affects those fluctuations between a high ice cover year and a low ice cover year? Some of it seems closely tied to the Oceanic Nino Index, or what most folks refer to as El Nino and La Nina events. What happens is that within the signal of declining ice cover, we typically have higher ice cover when the index is between -1 and 1, which are weak to neutral conditions. Whereas outside of -1 and 1, for example, a strong La Nina at -1.2 or a strong El Nino at +1.3, then we see minimal ice cover during winter. For this year, we will be in a weak La Nina during winter, so the expectation is for higher than recent normal ice cover on the Great Lakes. But these effects are also most consistent in the upper Great Lakes, so Superior, Michigan, and Huron, and less reliable for Lakes Erie and Ontario. However, we also have to understand that ducks are using kind of the shallowest portions of these lakes. So where and when ice cover happens really matters because, for instance, it might just be that 10 to 15% of these lakes need to freeze in the shallow bays for it to push ducks out. So some of these larger studies on how Great Lakes ice is changing may not equate to the metrics that matter to ducks. It is, however, a signal of things to come that we should all be watching and considering in our conservation planning. Where the ducks can be and will be in the future makes a difference in where foods are needed during migration in winter. That seems to be strongly shifting north, but of course we have ducks that do different things, and sustaining quality migratory stopover in wintering areas up and down the flyways remains important. After all, not every winter is the same. For instance, it really looks like ducks are going to travel farther south earlier this year than in the past few years. Of course, less of them because there are just less ducks because the prairies have been dry, especially those seasonal wetlands that are really important. But where they are should be farther south, even if there are less. So, in my opinion, none of this is doom and gloom because in the signal of later snow cover and less ice cover, we still have a lot of variation from year to year. A shameless but truthful plug here, that is what makes listening to the weekly and long-term migration forecast from the FowlWeather Podcast so important. In that variation of weather, when we report, you can pick the best times to hunt. More days afield with ducks in the sky and in the bag. Next up, a bit of listener Q&A and then our migration forecast. So please stick with me. The Farmland Group is your one-stop shop for real estate brokerage, consulting, management, lending, and appraisal across Arkansas, Mississippi, Missouri, Louisiana, Georgia, Tennessee, and growing. Contact them today at farmlg.com. Hey, I'm telling you, do not hesitate because these folks are busy buying, selling, and providing consulting and management strategies that build value into your portfolio and your land. So get in the queue today. Get on their radar. Get on their books. Man, y'all won't be disappointed. Contact the Farmland Group today at farmlg.com. That's farmlg.com. Oh, and we are back. The first question was about our note a couple weeks ago stating that there is no such thing as a southward migration on a south wind. All right, which is certainly true. But a listener reached out and stated that we have ducks showing up on a south wind. So what's going on? ? So that is completely different. And if folks are finding that in the Mid-South, yeah, that happens. Ducks show up on a south wind for sure, but it's not ducks from the north. As we've noted previously, once ducks get south of about the Boot Heel of Missouri, they just mill around. That's likely true of like mid-Atlantic, probably around, North Carolina latitude and certain over into Kansas, Oklahoma. And then the west is weird, but all along the Pacific coast where it's mild enough, all winter for ducks just to move around in search of food and refuge, they just mill around. But let's pick on pintails because we've known about their predictable movements for decades. Folks in northern Arkansas and Mississippi later in winter always say, the pintails just got here. They're correct, but it's not from the north. Al Afton and Bobby Cox, two very well-known researchers, did some work out of Louisiana and LSU, did a great telemetry study a few years back where they marked female pintails and then watched their regional movements. Relatively early in migration, a lot of ducks just go to coastal Louisiana because it has more predictable water when portions of the MAV are often still dry. Folks know this. Into fall, y'all sometimes stay really dry, but coastal wetlands are much more predictable, so the ducks go there. This is kind of like this year in some way, whereby there are more ducks in Arkansas and Mississippi than the past few years. Not as much about weather, well, somewhat, but it's really that Missouri and Illinois have been really dry, and the ducks did a flyover and ended up there. But for the marked pintails in Louisiana, as winter moved on and south winds were related to rain events, pintails fanned out of their original stopping locations in the south to exploit newly flooded areas. They were also encouraged to move when hunting season opened, and they sought out areas without disturbance. So if you're seeing ducks showing up on a south wind, my bet is that those south winds are also correlated with storm events or at least declining pressure, and that ducks are making regional movements to exploit newly flooded habitats to feed. So no, ducks do not make major migrations out of the north, showing up in the south on a south wind, but they do redistribute regionally on a south wind once south of those latitudes across the flyways that I noted here. But do remember, these are not naive ducks hot from the north when they redistribute like that. These are not naive ducks hot from the north that have traveled very far. They are wise ducks that have likely been shot at already that are looking for food and refuge. So there's certainly more call and decoy shy and not as hungry as dumb and fresh hot ducks from the north. Next question went something like this. You talk about the benefits of moist soil a lot, such as the interview in episode 110 with the fella from Barker Ranch in Washington State. What makes moist soil so attractive to ducks, and why not just plant corn instead? This is a great question. Of course, corn has tons of carbs, but it is not nutritionally complete. Left standing, it is very attractive to ducks, but it doesn't work everywhere. Lots of places end up with huge flocks of blackbirds that pick it apart before ducks can get to it. Coots arrive early and will destroy a corn crop, and snow geese can certainly obliterate it too. But largely, a typically kind of glyphosate-ready cornfield is corn and then a desert of dirt underneath it. So it doesn't have the invertebrates. It does not have the diverse nutrients otherwise that ducks need from the moist soil weed seeds, which are their natural foods. Some folks years ago talked about grassy corn, which was doing the pre-emerge spray, planting corn, and then just really letting weeds come up within it. which is all honestly, I looked at it as honestly a way to trick people into at least having some additional diverse nutrition of those weed seeds with the corn. But this idea was dumb because the weeds are coming up within your corn and competing with it, and your corn is shading your weeds and competing with it, when you could just strip plant corn with moist soil in between in swimming space nearby. It makes way more sense to be, the best of both rather than have those plants compete with each other. But a lot of big clubs that are smart just run moist soil nowadays because it's free. You just make sure and make hot mud at the right time and you get free weeds to pop up. Most of the time, the foods available are abundant enough in these moist soil areas to feed ducks all during migration in winter, and they are more nutritionally complete than a single food, that is, corn with a dirt desert underneath. Also, if you tend to care about ducks in general heading back north, they provide invertebrates for hungry hens when they start to need protein, and the seeds and tubers typically remain available well after a corn crop has been decimated. Well, everything eats corn in fall and winter, and so by spring, that corn crop is usually decimated. Moist soil is also just better for soil structure and health. Nutrient and sediment runoff is less, and a diversity of other animals use moist soil wetlands throughout the seasons as opposed to corn, which is kind of okay for a few critters for a short period of the year. That said, I'm also not an idiot, and I've always said that if I had the capacity to own a 100-acre block of land, I would put 25% of it in flooded corn and then rotate it through the other 3 blocks of moist soil among the years. Hope that answered your questions, folks. Keep them coming. Shoot me this Q&A. I really like it. Everything's on the table, and, I say try to stump Dr. Mike. I think I can answer most of it. I don't know everything about ducks, but I sure do know ducks fairly well. Alrighty, on to the duck migration forecast for this week because it is a good one. I'd say we are looking at the first big mallard movement out of the north in the central and Mississippi flyways in the coming week. The mallard number should peak at the Iowa and Missouri latitudes, maybe even a bit more into the Missouri latitude by the weekend. And I usually don't do this far out, but if I lived in Kansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Illinois, I'd be looking to get after those mallards on the 2nd and 3rd of December. Yeah, so we are looking an entire week out, maybe even Monday the 1st it'll start, depending on when the cold and north winds come. But you all should be getting after them because just after that, I'm also worried about a deep freeze heading even farther south. So some of you might find some pretty hard water pretty darn quick after this week, even into the mid-latitudes. For the Pacific Flyway, we expect for Washington State, Oregon, Northern California, in the Intermountain region from Ohio south for mallards to start peaking in abundance for the year late in this week. Same goes for southern portions of Colorado and most of Montana and Wyoming that are losing mallards starting on Tuesday night and continuing into Wednesday. Slowing down Thursday to Saturday and then rebooting on Sunday into Monday. Actually, by Monday of next week, a movement of mallards into New Mexico and western Texas is possible, so be ready. The West Texas high plains should be red hot with mallards all next week. Not as much this week, but all next week. In the Atlantic Flyway, mallard numbers should peak at the latitude of the Great Lakes in New York by the end of the week, with many pushing even farther south on freezing temps late in the week, with temperatures down to the low 20s for this coming Saturday and Sunday. Little to no snow may keep them around on rivers and lakes while making feeding flights with Canada geese to fields. Sticking with the Atlantic Flyway, early ducks should really be on the move this week, with pintails really starting to load up in North Carolina for the kind of late in the week starting on Friday period and into the coming weekend. Some fresh shoveler also mix in with those pintail at the same time, and the gadwall showing up more likely early next week at the same latitude at the same time. This is all going to happen probably at the same time as a good push of widgeon and teal into locales south of North Carolina. So, man, ducks are on the move in the east, folks. For the Central and Mississippi Flyway wimpy ducks, those early ducks, they're on the move all week into mid-southern locales, and we are talking kind of into the Memphis latitude and farther south, but mostly early in the week. So starting today until Wednesday, and then Friday through the weekend, following any nights with good, steady north or northwest winds. In the Pacific Flyway, similar results with early ducks on the move all week into Northern California and down to the Central Valley all week, but especially Friday into Saturday of this week. Oh man, and that's the best migration forecast the Fowl Weather Podcast has ever given this early. Get after them, my friends, and enjoy your Thanksgiving week with family, friends, and the ducks. Thanks for listening, and as always, may your skies be filled and shoot straight, my friends.
The holidays mean more travel, more shopping, more time online, and more personal info in more places that could expose you more to identity theft. But LifeLock monitors millions of data points per second. If your identity is stolen, our US-based restoration specialists will fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Don't face drained accounts, fraudulent loans, or financial losses alone. Get more holiday fun and less holiday worry with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.